Hey B&H viewers, welcome back to our multi-part series on getting started with strobe photography. In our last video, we learned how to properly sync the camera with the strobe, and today we're going to start making pictures. In this installment, we're going to demonstrate how our light affects an image using a single strobe. The settings can be a little bit different whether we're shooting indoors or outdoors. We'll offer up some things to consider in both scenarios to maximize the desired result. Once the camera and light are in sync, you may or may not need to make some adjustments to your viewfinder. Now, many modern mirrorless cameras automatically raise EVF gain when a shoe-mounted remote is attached. Some do, some don't. You might need to manually raise EVF gain or disable exposure preview in order to properly compose through an electronic viewfinder. Now, if you're shooting with an SLR, your eye can only see the light available in the space. So if you're in a dark or dim space, consider using the modeling light on your strobe. Now, this makes previewing the way the light falls a bit easier and gives you a decent idea of how your light placement affects the composition. Make some test shots. This is a great way to ensure that you're happy with your composition, light placement, and exposure settings. And once you've chosen your composition, place your strobe in a position that flatters the subject. A few starter positions to consider. 1. Center the light directly on the subject with the fixture tilted slightly down. 2. Position the strobe slightly to the left of the subject, tilting down. Both provide a simple way to flatter your subject and make their likeness legible. Now, if you're going for something less traditional, try using your strobe as a backlight to create a silhouette, or light your subject underneath for a campfire story effect. If your remote is in the TTL mode, the strobe will automatically set power based on your camera's exposure settings. Now, while this does tend to produce properly exposed images, it doesn't always provide the desired effect. If you prefer to manually manipulate the strobe power, you'll need to set this on your fixture or via the remote before shooting. Now, you could use a light meter and take a reading, but in the digital era, it's very easy to make a few test shots and adjust your power as needed. As you can see, we're basically using the light straight out of the box. We're not using any modifiers, so the light you're seeing is directly from the strobe. This is sometimes referred to as bare bulb or bare tube, and the quality of the light can be quite hard. If you're working with a single strobe with no modifiers, you can alter your light placement or even bounce the light off of another surface to change its quality. You can also soften the light with light modifiers, and we'll be taking a look at some of those in our next video. Taking your strobe outside of the studio space can be incredibly rewarding, but depending on location and time of day, you might be contending with a lot more ambient light. You can tackle this by stopping down your aperture, but this might force some unwanted compromises for your vision and definitely limits your options in creating a shallow depth of field. To maintain low noise ISO and wide aperture, you have to raise your shutter speed. Of course, with flash sync at 1/125th or even 1/200th of a second, you might not always be able to balance exposure. This is where high-speed sync comes into play. As discussed in a previous video, this feature releases a series of pulses from the strobe, allowing you to raise your shutter above standard sync speed. Now, if you're making a portrait and using sunlight or reflected sunlight as a background or hair light, you'll want to set your camera exposure for that scene. Exposing for the background can make your subject appear dark or underlit. TTL mode offers a fast read of the scene and will output light accordingly. Manual mode is more precise but might require a little bit more experimentation. However you work, make test shots to find that perfect balance in your foreground and background lighting. Remember, hard light from the strobe matches well with hard light from the sun. Just like in the studio, you can alter the softness of your light by changing light placement and, of course, by using light modifiers. And again, we'll dig into some of those in our next video. For all things strobe photography, visit B&H. I'm photographer David Flores. See you next time.